Well, it's brilliant that people have come early, so that's good. So I think as you can see, we're all getting our drinks and talking about what mugs we're drinking our drinks out of. So please do get yourself cups of coffee and tea. Popcorn. Good place to sit.
Popcorn.
Right, well, I'm going to have to tell everybody watching that I need to reboil my kettle because my tea's gone cold. And I wish it was gin, but it is tea.
What matters to you, Catherine? Tea.
I'm quite fond of my family, but tea.
Yeah, don't make us put it in order. That would cause all sorts of trouble.
Okay.
Right, Hannah.
Shall I start? Thank you. Okay. A warm welcome to our event, everyone. My name is Hannah. I work in community development at North London Hospice. This afternoon, we aim to explore what matters most to you when getting all the practical planning in place at the end of life. Why thinking about what you treasure and value most is important time well spent. This event is part of Dying Matters Week, which, for those who don't know, is aimed at opening up conversations around death, dying and bereavement. It's about carving out some time, like you have today, to think about what can be or what can feel difficult conversations to have. So just before we do introductions and housekeeping, a little bit of context. So when we refer to these what matters conversations, are we talking about advanced care planning? Not really. So unlike advanced care planning conversations, these are more about overall well-being than medical matters. They're about what helps you feel that life is enjoyable and worthwhile. What makes you feel most at peace? Do you prefer a bath or a shower? In other words, the more personal side of what matters. However, they are very much entwined in advanced care planning. They can help ease the way for these conversations. By being clear about the things that matter most to us, it's far easier to plan ahead and wrap future healthcare around your wishes and priorities. So before I said we do the introductions and watch the film, Nitesh from Healthwatch Barnet is just going to go over a few housekeeping bits. So over to you, Nitesh.
Thank you, Anna. So just a few bits and bobs, folks. First of all, welcome. So this is a Zoom webinar, which is slightly different to, I guess, a regular meeting or Microsoft Teams meeting, in that everyone is put on mute by default, and also your cameras are turned off by default. That's not because we're trying to stifle people seeing each other. It's just a function of webinars. The second is that the event is recorded, so people who are able to attend today or stay for the full amount of time, they'll be able to see it later. Worry not, you won't be able to see your face in it. So it's one of the positives of a webinar. There's not necessarily a privacy related issue there. If we do run into any technical issues, which I hopefully don't think we have, because we've done a few test runs, we should be fine. But if you do run into any technical difficulties, it's no worry. You can always rewatch the video later at a later time if you wish. And the methods of communication we have. So we have two ways. The question and answer function, which is the fourth tab on your toolbar. That's how we're going to hopefully be able to have communication. And obviously, you can always stick up your hand if you wish to speak vocally as well. This is a part where I'm going to introduce Paula, who's here today with us. She is the end-of-life lead for Jewish Care, and she will be taking your questions.
So Paula is going to be managing the questions as they come in. So we just wanted to welcome you today. Another person I just wanted to welcome as well is Sophie, who is very much our behind-the-scenes person who's going to be recording and editing this film so that we can share it afterwards. Welcome, Sophie. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Nitesh, before I just give a bit more context about the film?
No, I think a film introduction will be good.
Cool. Yeah. Just to mention, we're about to go into the film, and it's just to say it's one part of a larger body of thinking developed by a group called the End of Life Care Think Tank, that amongst its members include Marie Curie, Macmillan, Age UK and the Royal College of Nursing. We're delighted that two of the founding members of the think tank join us today, and after the film they look forward to hearing your thoughts about the film and having a conversation around your questions. Dr. Catherine Mannix wants us to be better informed and less afraid about dying. She's had a career in palliative medicine and now campaigns to improve public understanding about dying. Dr. Julian Abel, so I'm rushing through, you can give a wave when I mention you, sorry, I'm talking for you. Dr. Julian Abel also spent his career in palliative care. He's interested in how communities nurture compassion, which can transform the experiences of people dying and caregiving. Our third panellist is our own Dr. Jo Brady, palliative care consultant in Barnet, 9 years at North London Hospice, and in palliative care nearly 20 years. And Jo is passionate about trying to help people find a way to start having conversations about dying and what matters most to them. Thanks, guys. So over to the film.
The things that matter to me in my life are relationships with family, my assistant's dog Molly, having a purpose in life, and a good end to my life. These are the things that matter to me. As life goes on, it's important to talk about what matters, to let others know your wishes, fears and goals for the future.
Having those what matters to me conversations, it's particularly important through this pandemic, because how can people around us know what we want if we haven't opened up to them and told them?
I came at the age of 9 from Kashmir. To think that boy from that mud hut has done well in Bradford, hopefully I'd like to contribute to the betterment of society in the UK and elsewhere in the world.
My dog used to volunteer in Animal Sanctuary, and he was one of the rescue dogs that came in, so I've had him almost 10 years.
My children are the most important thing to me, and I love painting and drawing with eye gaze technology. I'm writing my memoir, which has lots of sex, drugs and rock and roll.
I'm into cars, I love cars. Every minute I'm under the bonnet, I'm underneath it, I'm trying to fix this or fix things on it.
I run marathons, half marathons, run every Sunday morning.
Feminism really matters to me, particularly at the minute in the current climate. I've started to be thinking more about inequalities in healthcare for women. LGBTQ rights really matter to me as well, and as a queer woman, so those are things that are important to me.
Satisfying work, my wife, my dogs.
Top of my list at the moment is family.
Spending time with family. With friends.
To be warm.
What was important to me pre-COVID is totally different from what it is now. I used to love to be well groomed. My nails were always well done. Not important anymore. What is important now for me is to be alive, to have good health, and to go on holiday. I mean, I so want a holiday. So the three of us as a family were hit very badly by COVID. My husband ended up being hospitalized in intensive care. While he was in hospital ventilated, a number of things went through my mind, because my husband and I had never talked about where he would want to be, whether he would want to be home, where he would want to be buried. Nothing of those wishes had been aired between me and my husband. Now we know what's going to happen. I know what is very important to him, and I think he also knows what is important to me as well.
We don't ask often enough about what is it that's most important to people, what matters most to them. If we know that, when health and social care are engaged in trying to help people in the last part of their lives, then at least they will know how they can focus their care and what they can do to make things better.
So what I always say is, well, let's just start from building up trust, building up a relationship, talking to somebody about what actually living well means to them.
It's a process of many conversations about getting to know someone, being nosy, being curious, finding out more about them and their close ones, their family members, their friends, and what they value, what they treasure.
So what matters most as a question, if we really listen to the answer, the medical treatments will just fall into place.
I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to have a conversation. I didn't want the plan. But my goodness, that plan enabled him to be in his own bed, listening to the owls with his favourite music, with his cat on the bed, us coming in and out, favourite food until the last few minutes. You know, it was a privilege, you know, and it is a huge consolation in our grief, and we have no regrets as a family, and I know from other stories from families how precious that is.
So what I teach is that if I was dying and I wasn't able to speak for myself, I wouldn't want you coming near me with a flannel, because it really hurts my skin when somebody does that to me. Nobody's going to know about that unless I've told them. So they could be causing me pain at a time when they really want to be helping me and caring for me.
People who are dying need to know that their loved ones are in a safe place emotionally,
and are secure. I've been in situations where people have decided that they want to try and protect their family, and they try and protect them by shutting down conversation. That is worse than anything, both for themselves and for the family that really want to be part of that.
Families can be left with a terrible feeling of guilt if they feel they couldn't do the right thing for their loved one. If they were asked to make decisions for their loved one towards the end of life and they just didn't know. They didn't know what their loved one really wanted. Those feelings of guilt can be as high as post-traumatic stress. And that's the last thing I would want for my family.
If you just talk about treatment, you're not really going to get the essence of the person, and you're not going to find out what their priorities are.
The care I receive will be more important to me than the treatment, I think.
We had a patient who was brought in as an inpatient, very unwell, didn't have any family members, but there was one thing that he was bothered about. It wasn't about his medical needs. He came in and said, I've been brought in by ambulance and I've left my parrot out of its cage. It's flying around at home and somebody needs to sort this parrot out, because if you don't, I'm going to leave the hospital. We managed to get a parrot specialist to come in and capture the parrot for him, look after the parrot until he was able to go home and then be back home with his parrot, and home was where he wanted to be at the end of the day.
We've been encouraging doctors and nurses and carers and families to think ahead to what would be important to them if they were nearing the end of life. I mean, sometimes it can become quite clear to me that my patient doesn't want to talk to me about it, and that's absolutely fine.
There are certain cultures that don't discuss or engage in end-of-life conversations. There will be those people, you say it once, twice, three, it gets to a point whereby you think, actually, this is assault. You can't impose it on people.
As a palliative medicine friend of mine once said, it's a moral crime to waste the time of a dying person, and I think sometimes professionals don't remember that.
We knew I was going to die young and shouldn't have made 17, I'm now 27, but it took a professional coming into our home and telling us it was okay to talk about death, and we weren't giving up, we weren't being negative. If we can give people the confidence to show them that it's not a morbid conversation, actually it's about what matters to you, what makes your life worth living, what would you want for yourself in an ideal world, and just try and capture that over time.
I suppose it's about grabbing opportunities rather than shying away from them, because sometimes it's easier to shy away, but there can often be quite a relief in the room when you do go there. What I did with my family was I used this symbol system, Talking Mats, and we looked at all the different aspects of what they would consider, what they wouldn't consider, and they were both able to express different views, and we just revisit that every year.
We need to talk about it. People don't talk about death. I don't know, maybe, like I said, when I first came here, I was petrified going anywhere near the mortuary, because it's the unknown. I'll never forget this undertaker. He came one day and he said, why are you shaking? What are you scared for? I said, because the body. Right? He said, why? I said, I don't know. That's the thing, he said, you don't know. The person you've got to be worried about is not the dead, it's the living.
I think, like a lot of things, it's easier when you do it than you think it's going to be, and actually it's the fear of doing it is a lot worse than actually just kind of jumping in and giving it a try.
Food and drink are very important to me, so in the last days, weeks of life, I think that will still be an important aspect. Even if I can't eat or drink very much, I quite like salt and vinegar crisps, so that would be something that I'd like to taste. Little tastes of food, maybe even dark chocolate or something like that.
I'd love to have flowers around me. My mummy loved yellow roses, and I do too, and I would love the room to be full of yellow roses.
Like usually just a big party or something like that, everyone getting smashed, would be hilarious. As many people as you want, like, free bar.
Being brought up in Wales, I think I would love to be in Wales, somewhere sort of in the countryside in North Wales actually. Ideally with my family, or my partner at least,
Personally, I would love to spend the last few weeks of my life in the club lounge at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Singapore drinking champagne. That would be my ideal, with my partner with me. Probably not going to happen, but it gives you an idea of what's important in my life.
During COVID, it's never been clearer that having sensitive and compassionate conversations about what matters most to a person is crucial.
I think we should all have a think about what matters most to us in our life.
What matters to me conversation can take place in different settings. It can be around the dinner table, in the pub, with your GP, or when you go to college, when you get married, when you have a baby, when you retire. These are all life-changing moments. And it's the time to have the conversation about the greatest life-changing moment.
Let's get talking about what matters to me.
So not a lot from me, because we very much want to stimulate discussion from our wonderful people that are attending today. But so we have a few questions for our dear panel, but I think probably the most important thing I'd love to just start off is what stimulated the making of this film, please, if you wouldn't mind just jumping in there.
We wrote a paper. We were one of the strangenesses of palliative care is that when you look and see whether the questions have been asked about what's most important to people, what makes a good life, never mind a good death, that you actually can't find the answer to that question. It's not there in the research literature, and it's kind of blooming obvious when you think about it. But we thought that on writing this paper, we need to reframe advanced care planning, because advanced care planning is so heavily focused on where people want to die. Do they want resuscitation? Would they like to have intravenous fluids or antibiotics? And I think what most people really want to know is, what can I do to live well? And I'll tell a very quick story about this. We were doing some work on the ward in the hospital I was working at. There was this 93-year-old gentleman, and we were trying to do advanced care planning with him. And there was a very nice doctor there who asked the questions. And later on in the afternoon, the doctor, it's that classic thing in hospitals where the curtains go up, and you think that when the curtains go up to surround the patient, nobody can hear anything else you're saying. And this 93-year-old man was talking to his daughter, and the doctor was next door. And he said to his daughter, they kept on asking me about, did I want to be resuscitated, or where do I want to die? I want to know how to live. I want to know what they will do for me, not what they'll avoid doing. And that kind of summed it up, really. And when you ask the question about what matters most, how can you live well, what is a good life, it completely reshapes and reforms how you think about having conversations about.
It's what you treasure, isn't it, and find most valuable.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So the paper that we wrote is the What Matters Charter, and it's about getting that conversation out into the public domain, because there's a lot of anxiety about the conversations, the medical conversations that we need to have about the treatments we would accept or prefer not to have, prefer to avoid towards the end of our lives. But that's a very short component of the living at the very end of our lives, isn't it? And doctors, nurses, whoever the healthcare professionals are who are having those conversations, we often find that the person or the family are reluctant to embark on that conversation because it feels awkward, it feels sad, it feels about something really difficult. Whereas if we're able to say, well, okay, tell me what matters most to you, because what I'd like to be able to do is work with you to wrap the care that we can give around the things that really matter to you. That's a completely different approach to that conversation, isn't it? And we can talk about the things that are possible that we'll try to do. We can talk about the things that could get in the way that we'll try to avoid. And we're now having a conversation person to person instead of some unbalanced conversation between a healthcare professional doing their important job and this poor patient who's trying to navigate their way through the system. We've got to bring it back to a person talking to a person.
One of the questions that I want to ask you is that we've chosen for you is, what kind of things should we be learning about each other from these conversations? And what, while you were talking, that sprung to mind, which is in my experience often, is that people are frightened to upset each other. The person maybe who knows they're maybe deteriorating or have a prognosis is frightened to upset their family member, and the family member's upset to bring conversations up with the person. What's your experience of that?
Go on, Catherine. I answered it for last time. And Joe, you haven't answered anything yet. Go on, off you go.
You're not getting away with it.
I was hoping to just sit back and enjoy the Masters at work. I think we worry a lot about upsetting people, but the truth is lives are happening with all the fullness of life, the richness of life, the good, the bad and the ugly. And talking about it isn't going to make it happen. And not talking about it isn't going to stop it from happening. So I think we just have to be brave enough to have conversations. And people, in my experience, make it very clear if they feel comfortable and uncomfortable. And I think sometimes we've just got to be brave enough to dip our toe in the water, watch for the ripples and see how things are received. And if people don't want to have the conversations, they'll make that clear to you. Well, anyway, doc, what about that tablet? Oh, okay. All right, we'll go that way. And so I think you just have to be respectful to where people are at that moment, at that time, on that day, how they're feeling. And embrace the opportunities. I think somebody said it in the video, we've got to make the most of those opportunities when they arise, and they do arise. People do try and have these conversations. But we stop each other because we love each other and because we want to protect each other.
Yeah.
But sometimes we have to be brave enough to protect people in a different way.
Yeah, and I think that we've all had the experience of looking after people at the very end of their lives, and at the end of that period of care and getting to know somebody's, I'm using the word family, but I mean the people they choose that they love the most around them. At the end of it, those people who've talked it all through have generally had a less difficult time because they've all been on the same page as each other all the way through. And as things change, we can help them to understand what the changes are. I've never had a family say to me, oh, I wish we'd never talked about it. It ruined everything that we discussed it. But how many times have we heard as palliative care people, oh, I really wish we'd talked earlier. So this is a gift from us as human beings, as mortals. I'm not, as far as I know, thinking about dying in the next few years. But my family know what's important to me, because one day something might happen and a doctor like I've been might say to a family like I have asked, what did your mum say she would want if she was ever so sick that she might be dying? And I don't want my family to be like the families I've met who just look petrified and can't believe that we're having this conversation. I don't know, I never asked. They glum and well know.
I'm getting, by the way, I'm just getting some feedback that the Zoom chat is disabled, Nitesh. I don't know whether someone's kindly told me that.
If anybody has any questions, there's essentially two ways to engage. You can either raise your hand and we will unmute you so you can have you can answer, you can address the question, and we can have a conversation about it. Or if you don't feel comfortable in doing that, you can just put in your question as a Q&A anonymously if you don't wish to state who you are. Yeah, either way is fine, whichever way works well for you.
So the Zoom chat is not disabled, is that?
It's disabled.
Right, okay. Okay. I would like to give a plug to your website, whatmatters.org, to look at the charter as well. And I think we've already spoken to you before about this wonderful blurb that you've got on there, which is so easy to read. It's friendly and it's welcoming and warming. I felt that focuses on, you know, I don't know if anyone heard us before, but we were talking about strong tea, strong coffee. Those things are really important, and not everyone knows about. That's so important to me. Give me strong coffee in the afternoon. I don't want it, but if I can't communicate, that will upset me. So I love the introduction of that, rather than, I think you all said, less focus on the emergency care treatment, which people don't want to talk about right now. But it's important to know in everyday conversations, oh, I didn't know you didn't like aubergine, and so forth. Do you tell me more about what made you write that on your website? Is it because of what I've just said, people aren't coming forward?
I just think that there's been such a big focus around, you know, where do you want to die, or, you know, do you want to be resuscitated or not? And when you're thinking about, I mean, I think there's something that you know, what we were trying to get at is that this is something that everyone can do at home in important moments in your life. Like we think about like what matters conversations just being something, as me standing up there, something that we can do in important moments in our life, and it would be you know, getting married, having kids, or retiring, or well, it doesn't matter, you know, and in these moments we can think about, okay, what really counts? And like you can think about the pandemic, and those kind of conversations are particularly important, especially when you can't see people and you know you really enjoy seeing people.
Yeah.
So what we were trying to do is to explain that these conversations, which you might call good life conversations, they're things that we can do throughout our life, and so that when the kind of moments arise where things are not going so well and we're confronted by illness, we already know what we want to focus on. That actually, when you're thinking about it, actually, what's really important is I want to, whatever time I got left, I want to spend it with my family and my friends, or I really like being at home, or actually going out walking the dog is a significant part of my life, and you know, being outside in the open air. It doesn't matter what it is, but if we don't even know, if we haven't ever thought about that, then what happens is that we just make assumptions. We, being the kind of magical medical people, you know, palliative care services, we make assumptions about going, well, if we control your symptoms and we talk about where you want to die, then everything will be fine. And of course, it's not like that at all. Yeah. Whereas if you tell us, I want to lead my life like this because I've had this conversation with my family, we can then go, great, well, we can then direct our care to enable that to happen as much as possible. And that conversation goes on right up until the very end, because if, you know, there might be a moment when, for example, that you're, so I'll give two examples. Examples really help. One is a colleague who was seeing this, it was a woman who had a terminal neurodegenerative disease, a motor neuron disease. You know, her body was falling apart and it was very difficult. And she was struggling to get fluid on board, and the whole medical team were all panicking, and they'd arranged for her to go to hospital so she could get a special tube put in. And the family were all there, and everyone's getting really agitated, and the ambulance has been called. And my colleague goes around and says, well, what matters most to you? Yeah. And this woman said, I just want to be at home with my family.
Yeah.
And it was like so simple, asking that question.
Yeah.
And then conversation was transmitted to family, and the ambulance was cancelled, and the woman died peacefully at home. And the other story is, I apologise for mentioning this. I run a podcast, and one of the interviewers was this guy. He's an intensive care consultant and palliative care physician. It's a kind of unique combination. And he was talking about that even in the intensive care setting, that he'll sit with the families and say, what matters most to you, and what do you think the person we're looking after, what do you think what matters most to them? And so, like, the answers vary, because it might be they are fighting for every last breath in life, or it might be actually what matters most is just being peaceful, and we've had great times together. And that asking that question allows you to frame it in the context of the importance of the people you're talking to. So my recommendation would be, everyone, go and talk to your family about what matters most to you.
So Julian, questions are coming in now. Thank you, everybody. There's someone, you may have just answered this question. It says, other than when someone is facing a terminal prognosis, are there other encounters when professionals might prompt these discussions? I don't know whether Catherine or Joe want to answer that one.
Well, I saw that question come in, and I think that the first thing to say is that what we're trying to do is subvert the idea that professionals start these conversations. I think what we're about is we've all had these conversations. These are conversations we've had in our families. And so the first time you have the conversation isn't with a healthcare professional. But it is really important, if you've got a long-term condition that causes you sometimes to have to be in hospital, and sometimes to feel too rotten to tell people what really matters to you for a period of time until they've had you on the ramps and sorted you out and got you home again. So one of the things that occurs to me is, throughout the rest of our lives, particular things are triggered by the health service at particular ages. You get a measles vaccination for your first birthday. Happy birthday. You get invited for particular healthcare screening. Some of it is gender specific, some of it is age specific. All of us from our 60th birthday get invited to the bowel cancer screening program.
Absolutely, landmark moments.
So what about some landmark moments that are, have you started your what matters to you conversations with your family? Reminded maybe through the public health system, but not come to the surgery and talk to your doctor about what matters. Start the conversation in your family, and actually, if you've got any questions about your health, come and talk to us.
That's a really great point. And I think actually we have a lovely kind of a statement here, or a question about compassionate communities. And I know that you guys are passionate about that as well. So the question here is, how can we maintain the momentum of the kindness in communities generated during the pandemic? I don't know who wants to go for that one.
Keep doing what you're doing. So what did you do in the pandemic that was different from what you were doing before the pandemic? And you can ask yourself, like, for me, the kind of prime example is we're all so British. We're so stiff upper lip. Like, don't look over the garden fence, whatever you do. Don't you walk by your neighbour's house and don't look up in case a neighbour is there. And it's like, no, look over the garden fence and ask your neighbour if they'd like a cup of tea, and say hello. And you'd be knocking on people's doors saying, is there anything I can get for you going out to the shops? And I think that's what this comes down to, is individuals. And it's individuals recognizing that it's a really good idea to be compassionate. And you can just improve a little bit in your life, and you think about what's the effect if everyone takes part in that. We got nearly 8 billion people in the world. What about if everyone chose to be a little bit more compassionate?
Julian, I really have been so grateful to you when we first talked months ago about this. You taught me the phrase survival of the kindest instead of survival of the fittest, and it stayed with me.
Well, when you start to look into this, of course, you know, you can think, okay, how did we survive? And you can measure the kind of impact of compassion on the body, because it's this socializing hormone called oxytocin, and you go, oh yeah, well, it's present in humans, and is it present in other animals? And then you find it's present in all animals, and people think it's just animals with backbones, but I'd recommend watching My Octopus Teacher, because octopuses really get it. And actually, this phrase survival of the fittest wasn't one that Darwin came up with, and there's been a huge amount of interest recently about thinking about survival of the kindest. And it's I was chatting with I got so motivated by this, I started a podcast called Survival of the Kindest, and one of the people I spoke to recently is this Professor Dacher Keltner, who is a professor of psychology in San Francisco, and he got really interested in the evolutionary role of emotions and started looking outside of humans. And actually, you know, it's he's called himself a Darwinist because he got really interested in what Darwin had to say about it. And Darwin wrote a book called The Role of Emotions in Man and Animals, and also wrote about the role of social evolution in a book called The Descent of Man. And actually, there's some kind of, we forget the British phrasiness for survival of the fittest. It's all about survival of the kindest. It's embedded in us as human beings.
And we need that. We need that. Can I just say, a couple of people have asked some really beautiful questions and very personal. And I think they obviously have consented, so it's okay. In fact, Joe, I think this might be from your dear dad. Is your dad Sean?
Yeah. I saw that question too. So for those who missed it at the beginning, my dad has joined the webinar from Liverpool. Welcome, Dad. And how wonderful that we can be that connected. I love that this enables that. Yeah. And yes, obviously being in palliative care, you would expect that I have had these conversations with my family, although we saw in the video, Shebo, who was one of my colleagues at the Royal Free, hadn't had those conversations with her husband, and he ended up in ITU. So we can make assumptions that we should be good at it, but do we do it?
Yeah.
And yes, I have had those conversations with my parents and encouraged them to sort out LPA and will and all those practical things. But my dad was just asking, perhaps this should be two-way. Brilliant. And does he know what my wishes are? So for the record, ashes in Formby Beach, please. But my kids know that. Yeah. My children are 14, 12 and 12.
Yeah.
And they know what my wishes are. They know what I want, what I don't want, because I have always been very open and transparent about these conversations. And I saw another question in the box. Dad, when I see you at half term, I'll fill you in on the rest of the details. The questions in the box about normalising those conversations, and somebody talked about schools. And actually, we have done that. We've gone in and done school assemblies. I love doing school assemblies, because there's often an assumption that you can't possibly take a hospice into schools, but of course you can. And of course you should, because there's many children there who are facing loss and bereavement and death and dying of parents or grandparents. And they need the space to be able to talk about it. And I remember we went into my daughter's primary school and said, we're from the hospice, does anyone know what it is? And one child put her hand up and went, yeah, my granddad went there and he died. And I was like, okay, we got to the D word pretty quickly and then we jumped. So you're right, let's not wait for the healthcare professionals to wait for a terminal diagnosis. I think that's what's so wonderful about what Julian and Catherine are trying to achieve, which is a societal change. Let's just normalise, let's reclaim it out of the clutches of the doctors and the hospitals. And let's throw it back out there to the real experts, which are the people living and dying, and they're best placed to tell us what matters.
Yeah.
So They're my reflections.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jo. One of the other questions that we had for you is what happens when we don't ask? And again, in the chat box, there are a couple of people that are asking about giving scenarios of when they've tried to open up the conversation, their relative or friend has shut it down. And they've asked, what suggestions do you have for questions to ask?
Well, we hear this a lot. So first of all, it's normal.
Yeah.
And there are days when it's not the right day, aren't there? Which doesn't mean it's not the right thing ever. It might just mean today's not the day.
Mm.
The other thing is that I do think that the pattern that we commonly see is a person decides this is a thing that we should talk about, mum and dad, by which I mean you should tell me. So the Bradys have realised they've done it that way round. The Mannixes did it that way round as well, just so you know, there's no shame. But rather than it being that one of us gives the other one a really good talking to, I think we need to flip it on its head and say, actually, what I want to do next time I see you is give you a really good listening to. So that's what Sean is saying to Jo. Half term, going to give you a really good listening to. So I think the way to navigate into these conversations is to say to people, I have a concern that there are things I might need to know that I don't know about you.
Yeah.
We don't have to do it like that. Sometime in the next few weeks, my mind would be more at rest if I knew those things. So one of the ways in is to invite rather than to insist, and then give the other person a bit more control about when the conversation happens. And the other one is to start by saying what's important to me. I've been thinking about these things, and what's really important to me is, and sometime when you've had a chance to think it through, because it can be a bit left field, this, I'd be really interested to hear what really matters to you too.
Yeah. So that's normalizing it, making it palatable, isn't it?
It is, and it is about it being shared. I'm not going to insist. I'm not going to call the time. I'm going to say, it will really help me if you'll talk to me about this. And since we're talking about our dearest people here, actually taking it to them and saying, you know, this is a concern of mine. People who love us don't want to leave us with a concern, even if it's actually a little bit difficult for them to talk about it. I'm not suggesting getting to the lengths of kind of emotional blackmail here, by the way. We're simply being who we are. You know, Mum, you were coming and I realised I was nearly out of tea bags. I was so worried. That's, you know, are you on your way? Can you pick up some tea bags?
Yeah.
Here's another thing. I'm really worried. This is important to you and me.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that?
I think I agree with that, but I think that I've just been thinking recently about, you know, they're trying to think about, like, if we take this outside of medicine or healthcare or whatever it is, and we begin a conversation with what matters to me. But I think it's probably easier and more interesting to begin a conversation is what matters to you. I'd really like to know what living well means for you. The really good thing about that is that you're automatically have asked somebody and you're saying, I'm prepared to listen, and you're interested enough to know, and you care enough to want to find out. So you can say, actually, just let me know what's really important in your life. What does living well mean? And there is a question about diversity, and I feel really strongly about this, because I think in palliative care you can point the finger at palliative care and go, where is the diversity in it? And I think it is a failing in palliative care. But you start with the question, what matters most to you? What is a good life? You are individualizing what you're doing, and you are not making any assumptions about issues around diversity of the people in front of you.
Mm.
And in fact, we've written an article which is under review about palliative care access, because it is a problem with it generally in palliative care. But the what matters conversations, the good life conversations, is a route out of that.
Yeah. Panel, I've got a great question. Over the past 10 years or so, a good friend has come to loathe the cold weather. He's told his wife that he wants to be buried in another country with a warm climate. She laughs and reminds him that he will be dead and won't notice the temperature. She also points out that if his grave is too far away, she and their children won't visit him. And the main question is, how would you advise them to resolve this?
Wow.
Yeah.
I think this is a good listening to situation, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't this all about the awfulness of dying? We're all being really cheerful, but actually nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to be dead and separated from the people that they've loved their whole lives. And depending on people's beliefs about death, that they may feel that that's a permanent separation or a temporary separation. But nobody's looking forward to it. So they've got a lot of talking to do, haven't they? Which is a little bit about where to be buried and a little bit about being grumpy about the British weather. And goodness me, this May hasn't cheered us up about that so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe also being visited, maybe that's not so important to that person. So there's a lot of listening to do there, I think.
Yeah, I think it's what's behind the sentence, isn't it? It's those listening for the antenna. Where tell me more about that. Tell me a bit more about that. But thank you for the question. I know it's a heavy one.
Paula, just to follow on from that, I mean, I agree. I hear layers and layers and layers there, and I think you would want to ask those probing questions to facilitate them to have those conversations.
Yeah.
But I also think there's often this perception that there's a right answer or a right outcome, and what I've learned in palliative care is no such thing exists. And sometimes some things have to reach a decision point, but that doesn't mean it's right or wrong. And I would encourage people to find the greyness within all of these conversations and compromises. And there's always, it is the richer the dialogue. And I think that there's so much that could fall out of that and so many ways forwards, coming back to the very central question of what really matters to that person, what matters to the family. And then how can we find a way forward that is a little less concrete and a little less black and white.
Yeah, there's thank you so much, Jo. A great question here. Professionals can ask what matters to you, but you can only ask this question if marginalised communities have had a chance to get some palliative care support. And really, how can communities take this forward?
I'm going to jump in on that one.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that this is a kind of central issue around what's the relationship between palliative care services and communities. And you know, Hannah is on the call, which is great because she's a community development worker.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is true of North London Hospice or what I know of North London Hospice, but in general, we're talking about palliative care in general. And actually, something that I've seen for years is how come diverse communities don't use our palliative care services, and it's the wrong way around. Because the starting point should be what's already strong in community. How are people looking after each other, and what can we do that will enhance that? And that's all to do with the nature of the conversation that hospices and palliative care services are having with communities. And if you start with going, okay, what is it? We need to have a conversation with communities to find out what it is that communities feel they need and how can our support help them.
Yeah.
So rather than doing something to communities, you're doing something with them. There's a fantastic model in Kerala in neighbourhood networks, been going for 20 years. And they've been building community resource for that long. And for example, they do things like financing. So the kids at school will collect a rupee. They raise the funds for palliative care, and the palliative care service is employed by the neighbourhood network community. It's not employed by health services, and therefore the community decides what's important, what matters most. And then you have that conversation and that integration. So rather than thinking more about service, you're thinking about strengths.
Yeah.
What are the strengths in the community? How can we add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm kind of very blessed to have a great team around us of thinking about what we can do after Dying Matters Week to develop the borough that we live in, to empower our respective multi-faith communities to take this conversations forward, which is really exciting. I can see a lovely message from my team saying we're going to be ending shortly.
Felt like we've only just started, but I think it's a good note to perhaps talk about, Julian, in terms of this is just the start of the conversation, and unless if there's any other questions you want to just finish off, Paula, I could just go to.
I think there's one last one. Maybe the patient client would find it easier to share with non-family. Good point. So perhaps relative invites person at end of life to share, but with whoever they want to share with.
I think that's the beauty of movements like Death Cafe. And I know that's something that you've already had experience of, and I think that's a really great way of practicing, just even hearing the phrases coming out of your own mouth. The other thing that's a really useful thing is that we live to an age now where our grandchildren or our great nieces and nephews are adults, and sometimes the parent-child relationship is too enmeshed to have that conversation in either direction. But we can skip a generation, just like you could tell your granny you'd done something that was too naughty to tell your mum. It's payback time.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for the questions, everybody. I'm going to hand you back to Hannah now for her closing words.
Well, thanks everyone. I know some people have had to nip off to school runs and everything, so I'll try and be quick in the last couple of minutes. As I said, this is only just the start of a conversation, and we've covered some serious topics this afternoon, but I hope everyone's had a chance to take away something. Thank you for the decision for coming to join us this afternoon and being willing to listen and share your thoughts on the Q&A. We're going to give you something practical to take away as well, which is a support guide around the topics we've discussed. So that'll be being sent out to you, and I'll put it in the chat box in a minute. And also look out for our feedback form that's coming out. So this, as we said, this is going to be sort of ongoing work locally to find out what people in the community want in terms of end-of-life care. So we really value your feedback with that. So final words, really. I hope today is this event will stimulate people to have their own What Matters conversations with those close to them. Or perhaps you might like to run a similar event with your own networks and groups. So don't hesitate to contact us if you'd like to explore this further. And likewise, if we haven't got to your question, Nitesh and I will follow up afterwards. But thank you all for joining us, and let's start talking about what matters to us. Thank you all for joining.
Hi, my name is Jo. In terms of what matters to me at the end of my life, I think without doubt my friends and family.
My parents, my brothers, my sister, my husband, my children, they are of utter importance for me, more than anything in the whole world.
My wife and children.
If my beloved wife is no longer with me, then please spray my pillow every night with Nina Ricci L'air du Temps, so it'll be the closest I can get to a cuddle before I go to sleep.
When I think about my death, which I try not to do too often, I would like it to be quiet and peaceful, and preferably at home with my family around me.
Having a sense of peace and acceptance, knowing that we're all okay, that we'll be okay.
To be assured that my family are going to be okay.
I want to be remembered even if I can no longer remember those around me.
Both my sons, daughters-in-law, grandchildren live in other countries, and it's vital for me that I keep in touch. So can I never forget how to use WhatsApp video.
I love nature.
Being out in the sunshine.
Having music to accompany my mood.
Being clean and tidy and clean clothes.
Compassion and positivity.
Kindness, compassion, laughter, fun, mischief.
What matters to me is strong coffee in the morning, strong cup of tea in the afternoon, and a whiskey in the evening.